To a veteran reader, this story hits with rare authenticity. The posture, the scanning, the clipped language, the reflex under stress, none of it feels performative. Laura Byrne is written like someone who has lived the cost of service long after the mission ended. But what makes this story land even harder is the respect it gives to those who served in silence, taught the next generation, and were never meant to be publicly remembered.
With a canvas jacket on, the gray-haired woman handled the rifle with fluid confidence. There was no uncertainty, no hesitation, and no need for help. Some younger men nearby snickered, making fun of her age. They suggested a smaller, less powerful firearm, something better for a grandmother. She ignored them completely. Her motions were sharp and efficient. She checked the chamber, cleared the weapon, and tested the trigger. In a stunning 11 seconds, she dismantled and reassembled a rifle that would confuse most people. The clerk's smirk vanished. One of the men went quiet. His eyes were now on her hands, seeing the old scars and the way her fingers moved with absolute skill. "How did you know the barrel's twist rate?" he asked. She did not answer. At that moment, a door to the back office swung open. The shop owner came out, saw her, and stopped in his tracks. "Byrne, is that you?" A deep silence fell over the store. "Who is this woman, really? Let us know where you are watching from in the comments below. If you appreciate stories of quiet heroes with amazing hidden talents, please subscribe. Your support truly helps our channel grow." The owner's words were about to uncover a secret she had buried long ago, revealing a past she thought was gone. The sun appeared at 5:30 in the morning over the Montana plains. Soft morning light came through the curtains, showing a perfectly neat room. The bed was made with military precision, its corners crisp and flawless. Next to it, a woman with braided gray hair was counting to herself. 1, 2, 3. She lowered into a push-up with a straight back, and her elbows held close. Her technique was perfect, with no wasted motion. At 68 years old, Laura Byrne did 100 repetitions without a single break or shake, her pace flawlessly disciplined. Her kitchen only had the smell of black coffee. There was no noise from cooking or a radio, just the gentle clink of a mug being placed 2 inches from the sink's edge. She drank her coffee standing up, her eyes fixed on a closet in the other room. A drab green, military-style footlocker was sitting in the corner. A combination lock kept it closed, and the numbers on it were worn smooth from the many times her thumb had passed over them. For 7 years, her hand had reached for that lock every single morning, only to pull back each time. On her wrist, a weathered green paracord bracelet was showing its age. While her coffee got cold, she traced its well-known knots in an automatic, practiced way. There was supposed to be a second one. A very long time ago, there was. With a tight jaw, she finished her coffee in 3 fast swallows. Outside, she checked the sky for the weather, not the phone on her counter. She saw the high clouds moving to the east, which told her the wind would change in the afternoon. She had learned this skill in a place where forecasts were rare and survival meant reading the environment. That ability, like so many parts of her old life, never left. Her truck's engine started right away, vibrating in the cold morning. She counted her 43 steps to the driver's door as part of a daily routine, judging distances, moving on instinct, knowing your exits. The old training was a shadow that never went away. For 40 years, the Ridgeline Diner had been a constant on Main Street, where only its name had ever been altered. Laura backed into her normal parking spot, making sure she had a direct line to the street, a habit from her old life. Inside, she took the corner booth that provided a complete view of the front door. Ruby brought her coffee without being asked. "A bit early today, are you not?" "It is the same time as always," Lorei said. Ruby smiled. She was used to short answers, and her friend's constant watchfulness. Lorei was checking the entrance, the reflections in the windows, and the other people there. A car backfired 3 blocks away, and the loud noise broke the morning peace. Lorei's hand stayed perfectly still, and her coffee did not move, but her eyes became sharp. Her other hand went under the table for 3 seconds, then came back up to hold her mug. Ruby looked in another direction, a quiet gesture she had done for 7 years. Her breakfast came just the way she liked it. Lorei ate with focus, her actions efficient and controlled. A man at the counter watched her for a moment, curious about the silent woman who always seemed so detached. He went back to his own breakfast. In a small town, many people had a past. Asking questions was not done. It was a silent understanding. By noon, Lorei's truck was heading east on Highway 89. She had to buy a new rifle. The barrel on her old firearm was worn out, its grooves smoothed down by thousands of practice shots. This was the way she kept her skills' sharp abilities that most people her age never had. The only gun store for 90 miles was Black Ridge Firearms, a place she had been avoiding for months. It was in a shopping plaza, with a large flag above its door. She could see the afternoon customers inside, and nearly all of them were young men. She saw men in tactical clothing, wearing hats from brands she stopped trusting 20 years ago. For a full 2 minutes, she sat with her hand on the truck's door, controlling her breathing. It was just a simple transaction, that was all. A bell chimed as she walked in at 3:47 in the afternoon. 3 men looking at scopes turned to look at her. She had on a plain jacket, jeans, and boots, and did not look like she belonged in that store. A man in his 20s with a fancy rifle case nudged his buddy with a smirk. His friend looked at her, chuckled, and then turned back to the scopes. Lorei went up to the counter. A young clerk named Jay was arranging boxes of ammunition. He gave her a routine, automatic smile. "Can I help you today, ma'am? I need to see the Remington 700 PCR in 308. Jay's smile briefly disappeared. "That is a very specialized precision rifle. Are you sure you would not like something more basic?" "I want the Remington 700 PCR, she said again. From the other side of the store, one of the men yelled out, "She is probably using it for hunting." His friends laughed. A muscle in Lorei's jaw twitched, but she did not turn around. Jay looked uncomfortable. "We have some great options for casual shooting," Jay offered. "They have less recoil and are easier to use. Maybe this is for your grandson?" "I do not have a grandson." "Oh, all right. I will go get the rifle." He went into a back room. The 3 men came closer, gathering near the knife display and staring at her openly now. Tyler, the one with the case, studied her carefully. Her posture was different, her sense of balance, her awareness of the space. He had seen it in soldiers coming home from war. But this woman appeared to be almost 70. It did not make sense. Jay came back with the rifle, a matte black weapon made for shooting at a distance. He put it on the counter carefully, as if she were fragile. Lorei picked it up. Her hands moved on their own. She looked at the chamber, cleared the firearm, checked the trigger, and felt the scope mounts. Her fingers worked with a skill that was far beyond Jay's. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, and no need for a manual. The shop became quiet. Her fingers felt a tiny stamp on the receiver. It was an engraving that was almost invisible. LB-97. It was her own initials. That was the same year she had consulted on the prototype. Her breathing grew shallow, the same way it did when a face in a crowd reminded her of a teammate who had died. Tyler came closer, his attention focused on her hands. He was seeing them for what they were now. He noticed their professional efficiency, a light scar on her right hand, and the type of callus on her left index finger that could only come from one activity. "The barrel twist rate," Lorei said softly. "Still 1 in 10? Jay was stunned. "Yes. How did you know? And the feed ramp is modified. That is not how it comes from the factory. That detail is not on the spec sheet," Jay said. "How could you know that?" Lorei gave no answer. She reassembled the rifle in a perfect 11 seconds. Her motions were minimal and flawless. She placed it back on the counter and looked at Jay with eyes that held a lifetime of stories he could never understand. Behind her, a new voice spoke up, full of mockery. "I bet she thinks MOA is a kind of tea." The laughter grew louder and more confident this time. The speaker, Derek, was a rich man whose new hobby made him feel important. It was obvious he had never been in real danger. Tyler was already looking at his phone, his expression changing as he read. He was digging through secret forums, places most people could not find. Stories were told about unofficial operators, untraceable figures from a time before everything was on record. His eyes darted from Lorelei to his phone and back. A young customer fumbled with some ammo, knocking a full magazine off the counter. It fell. Lorelei moved with smooth control, not panic. She caught it on the first bounce, cleared it with expert skill, and put it back, returning to her stance. The entire sequence took 1.8 seconds. It was a reaction that came from thousands of hours of training, an instinct that was part of her muscles. For a moment, the store was absolutely still. Then Derek's loud voice broke the silence for everyone there. "Impressive trick, old lady. Do you do that at the bingo hall?" The laughter that followed was weak and unsure. Tyler did not laugh. He was staring at his screen, connecting the information. His friend Brock whispered, "Man, what is it?" Tyler's response was low and serious. They used to tell stories about the first female operators, from way before the government would ever admit they existed. It sounded like some wild tale, perhaps. Tyler observed Lorelei's hands, taking in the old scars and calloused skin. He noticed her posture, aware of everyone in the room without appearing to watch. "Just look for yourself." Brock glanced over, and his smirk faded. Lorelei looked Jay in the eye. "I will take it. Wonderful. I will just get the paperwork." Jay fumbled with the documents, unsettled by what he had just witnessed. The reality did not match his initial judgment. "May I see your license and permit, please?" She took the documents out of her coat. Everything was completely legal and current. Derek stepped up, feeling bold with the small crowd watching. He felt comfortable teasing an old woman in this environment. "Ma'am, I say this with all respect, but maybe gardening is more your thing. This level of equipment is for people with serious experience." Just then, the door to the stockroom swung open. A man in his mid-50s came out, carrying a clipboard and inventory sheets. This was Garrett Vance, owner of Black Ridge Firearms for 12 years. A former Marine Scout sniper tattoo was visible on his forearm. He held a military bearing despite being out of the service for 20 years. He spoke, while his eyes were still on his papers. "Jay, phone the distributor about those sites. They are missing from the system, and 3 customers are on the list for them." Then he raised his head and saw Lorelei at his counter. The clipboard dropped from his fingers. Papers fluttered to the ground. All the color drained from his face, only to be replaced by a deep flush. His entire posture shifted from relaxed to rigid. He breathed a single, soft word, "Burn." Lorelei looked at him. Their eyes met. 23 years seemed to disappear. Garrett felt like he was back on the Fort Bragg range, remembering an instructor who outshot Marines half her age. He remembered her stunning accuracy and a quiet competence that shamed expert marksmen. He recalled the rumors about her history and her next assignments. Nobody ever had the nerve to ask for specifics. Her teammates knew that some pasts should remain confidential. He crossed the store in 4 fast strides. The gawkers and their ignorant jokes meant nothing now. He stood in front of her, his voice having a seriousness they did not recognize. "Ma'am, it is an honor to see you." The entire store went quiet. The laughing stopped immediately. Derek stood there with his mouth hanging open. Tyler's eyes were wide. Brock looked from Garrett to Lorelei, unable to process the sudden change. The room was now filled with a deep respect he had never witnessed from the relaxed owner. Jay stammered, "Boss, you know her?" Garrett kept his eyes locked on Lorelei. "How long has it been?" 23 years. "We met during the sniper competition at Bragg." Lorelei's voice was even and calm. 2001. "You are thinking of Panama." Garrett nodded as the details came back. Right. Panama. Good heavens. He then faced the room, his voice turning sharp. Listen to me, all of you, he gestured to Lorelei. This lady was in combat zones before many of you took your first steps. Chief Petty Officer Lorelei Byrne, retired, from the Navy's Special Warfare Development Group. Tyler's hands were shaking as he read the words from his phone, his voice weak. Lorelei Byrne, covert operations from 1979 to 2001. She trained Marine Scout snipers. She managed the trials for the M24 rifle. She was a consultant on precision fire standards. He stopped. He looked up, down at his phone, and then up again. You were in that unit, one of the very first women. Long before it was public knowledge. Lorelei was silent. Her face showed no emotion, a mask she perfected after years of knowing that any feeling could be deadly. Brock spoke in a low, unconvinced voice. That cannot be possible. Women were forbidden from special ops until 2016. It was official policy. Garrett's response was short and absolute. Officially. They were forbidden officially. A long silence hung in the air. Derek's face was as white as a sheet. His confidence was gone, replaced by the awful realization of his mistake. Chief Byrne was in Beirut in 1983, Garrett said, his voice flat like a report. Panama in 1989, and dozens of other places you will not find on any map. She did things we will never be told about for clients we will never know. And she never once looked for any recognition. He took the Remington 700 PCR from the rack, handling it with care. This firearm, its custom features, the specialized action, the precise angle of the ramp. He tilted it to let the light catch a tiny maker's mark. These designs came from data in field reports from 1997, Chief Byrne's reports. She was instrumental in setting the standards now followed for these rifles in multiple military branches. He held the rifle out to her as if it were a medal. This is yours. No cost. Garrett, I cannot accept this. His voice was firm but courteous. Absolutely, ma'am. With all due respect, it already belongs to you. Lorelei took the weapon. Her fingers gently traced the engraved letters one more time. LB-97. Her mark, her design, a legacy crafted into equipment for service members who would never know her. Jay whispered something under his breath that was half curse and half prayer. Derek could hardly find his words. I did not know. We were just... Garrett cut him off coldly. You were not meant to know. That was the point. Tyler moved closer, his hands trembling and his voice thick with shame. Chief Byrne. I want to apologize. I was in the army. I should have known. I am so ashamed that Lorelei's voice was gentle, with no trace of anger. No one was ever supposed to know. She shouldered the rifle with a practiced ease, like someone who had carried such a tool across every type of landscape imaginable. She was a person who helped others sleep safely at night. The group stepped back as she moved toward the exit. The men made a path for her instinctively, seeing a greatness they had overlooked before. Tyler followed her out, while Brock and Derek stood frozen in place, stunned. Outside, the descending sun threw a golden light. The wide Montana plains stretched to the mountains. Lorelei carefully stowed the rifle in her truck. Tyler stayed several feet away, giving her room. Chief Byrne, can I have a minute? She paused, with her hand on the door. I was deployed to Kandahar in 2019. I have not been right since I returned. I cannot sleep or focus. The VA is not helping, and I feel totally lost. He paused, breathing deeply. How do you deal with it? After everything you have been through, how do you just keep going? Lorelei was silent for so long that he thought she might just leave. A slight wind moved through the grass. A hawk cried out in the distance. You find a mission, no matter how small. What sort of mission? Like teaching the ones who are sure they have nothing left to learn. A hint of a smile touched her lips for a second. Are you acquainted with Ridgeline? Yes, ma'am. Thursday mornings at 0600 at the county range. I am usually by myself. Surprise flashed across Tyler's face. You would do that for me? I will listen. That is the first step. She got into her truck. The engine came to life, and she drove off. Her taillights faded down a road that led to a house where a locked footlocker contained a lifetime of guarded memories. For a solid 5 minutes, Tyler stood in the lot, phone in his hand, his mind reeling. Inside the shop, Derek mutters an apology that Garrett does not acknowledge. Brock stares at his screen, his face hardening as he reads about Tyler. Jay is ringing up the sale of a rifle, a gift to one of the people who designed it. Tucked away in secure government databases, a file on Lorelei Burns exists, guarded by secrets that will outlive them all. It lists phantom operations and clandestine missions. These actions saved countless people and influenced history, all while remaining completely hidden from view. As the sun sets over Montana, Lorelei sits on the edge of her bed, her eyes on a footlocker. She slowly lifts a hand toward the lock. Her hand pauses over the familiar combination lock. Inside is the past she has guarded for 7 years. It holds the pieces of a life lived in the shadows. It is the only record of her existence in a world that, on paper, never was. She chooses not to open it. Not this evening. Yet, for the first time in a very long time, she wants to open it soon, maybe on Thursday after she works with Tyler at the range. The notion of teaching, of passing on her knowledge instead of hiding it, makes her lower her hand. She lies back on her bed in her clothes, her gaze on the ceiling. In her mind's eye, she can see the bright faces of the young recruits. Not every one of them returned. The bracelet on her arm once had a mate, making it a complete pair. The other half is in that locker, clipped to the dog tag of a friend who was lost in a forgotten war. She closes her eyes, breathes in slowly, and counts to 100, just like she did in her training. For decades, the counting was her anchor, a method of control that kept her alive through the chaos. Thursday is in 2 days. At 0600, she will be at the range setting up targets at 300 yards and checking the wind, preparing routines she has not run in years. She knew Tyler would show, and probably Brock as well. Others might appear too, since news gets around fast in the veteran community. The word was spreading that Chief Byrne was back and at Ridgeline. She was the same Chief Byrne who had become a legend, mistaken for just another quiet local, but who was everything the stories said she was. Her house was now dark and silent. Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees. Even in summer, a Montana night can feel cold. Lorelei Byrne was wide awake, thinking about the rifle and the engraving she had earned. Her long years of silence might be ending. She never wanted fame, but some skills must be passed on. Some knowledge is too important to lose. Certain lessons can only be taught by those who made it back from places where one mistake meant you did not. At 0600 on Thursday, she would be at the Ridgeline Community Range. She would be waiting. After 7 long years, she would not be alone. If you know someone with that kind of quiet strength, a person who never wanted thanks for a past they cannot talk about, but who has your complete respect, please share this. And if stories like this one matter to you, and you want to honor these silent professionals, please consider subscribing. There are so many more stories that need to be told. Thursday morning arrived under a heavy, dark, gray sky. Rain was in the clouds, but it would hold off for another 6 hours. Lorelei was on the Ridgeline range at 0557, exactly 3 minutes early. She set up targets at 300 yards, her hands moving with practiced automatic grace. She stapled the paper, checked the stand, and adjusted the height perfectly. A breeze came from the northwest, at about 8 miles per hour. She did not need an instrument to know this. She could feel the change in air pressure, the way most people read the headlines. At 0603, the sound of tires on gravel announced someone's arrival. Tyler's truck appeared over the rise, stirring up dust. He parked his truck next to hers and got out slowly, handling his rifle case with extreme care. His movements were slow and respectful. The confidence he had in the shop had vanished, leaving only a deep, nervous admiration. He spoke first, saying, "Chief, I was not sure if you would really be here." Without taking her eyes off the distant target, Lorelei simply said, "I do not say things I do not mean." Tyler came closer and set his case on the shooting bench. His hands shook slightly as he opened it, showing a standard AR-15 rifle. It was a common firearm, the kind many veterans had, but one that very few had truly learned to use. Lorelei asked him, "Where is your rifle zeroed?" Tyler looked taken aback. 200 yards, I think." Her reply was quick and sharp. "You think?" He tried to explain, "I adjusted it last year, but have not shot it since to check." Lorelei finally stood up tall and turned to look directly at him. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes clearly showed she was not impressed with his preparation. "You will zero it today, and you will zero it every single time you shoot. The weather is always changing, and so is your zero, assuming things will make you miss your shot." He replied, "Yes, ma'am." Then, a second truck came into view. It was Brock's, much newer, and with many expensive modifications. He parked and stepped out, looking like he was having second thoughts. The case he carried for his rifle was obviously a high-end model. As he walked up, Lorelei watched him and asked, "Are you here just to watch, or are you going to shoot?" He answered, "I am here to shoot, if you will have me." She pointed. "Then, get on the line. 200 yards." Brock started to unpack his gear with the deliberate care of a person who learned everything from watching videos. He owned a custom rifle, built with the best parts money could buy. It was the type of setup that looked incredible, but demanded real expertise to be effective. Lorelei's experienced eyes scanned their gear, taking in every single detail. Tyler's weapon was not clean. Carbon buildup on the bolt would cause it to fail. She spotted that the screws on Brock's scope mount were loose. It was not attached correctly. She chose not to mention it yet. It was better to see them shoot first. "Tyler, you are up. 3 shots. Center mass. Take your time." He settled into a shooting position, his breathing audible in the quiet morning. His posture was all wrong, too rigid, with his elbow held too high. He was fighting his own rifle instead of working with it. The first shot broke the silence. Through her binoculars, Lorelei saw the impact was 5 inches low and 3 inches to the right. "Adjust your hold," she instructed. His next shot was closer, but still off the center. "You are anticipating the recoil. Let the rifle do its work." His third shot hit 2 inches from the bullseye. It was an improvement. It was not good, but it showed he could learn. Now it was Brock's turn. His stance was perfect, straight out of a textbook. His very first shot landed in the exact center of the target. He looked over at Lorelei, a small smile on his face, expecting praise. She said, "The air is calm, and your target is not shooting back. This is not the real world." His smile faded. Lorelei then moved to her own rifle, the Remington 700 PCR from Garrett's shop. She had already confirmed its settings and its accuracy. She was intimately familiar with the weapon she had helped design. She settled into a prone position with an easy, fluid motion that spoke of endless practice. "The wind is now picking up to 12 miles per hour, she announced. "Our new target is at 400 yards. The paper targets had not been changed. They were still at 300. Tyler started to ask a question, then thought better of it. Brock looked completely confused. Lorelei fired. The sound of her shot was sharper, cleaner than theirs. Looking through his scope, Tyler saw the impact on a steel target he had not even seen before. It was positioned 100 yards past the others. A direct hit. "How did you even know that target was there?" he asked in amazement. "I set it up at 0545, she said. Tyler checked his watch, but that was before we arrived. Lorelei stood, brushing the dust from her clothes. "I make it a point to be the first one here." For the following 90 minutes, She put them through drills that exposed every one of their weaknesses. They worked on shooting from difficult positions and acquiring targets under time pressure. They learned how to calculate for distance and wind without relying on a calculator. Her coaching was direct and methodical. When Tyler's unsteady breathing threw off his aim, she corrected him on the spot. When Brock's trigger finger showed a hint of hesitation, she demonstrated the correct technique one time. At about 7:30, more trucks started to arrive. These were the veterans that Tyler had contacted online. One was Marcus, a former Marine in his mid-40s with intense, restless eyes. Another was Sarah, an Air Force vet in her early 30s. She stood with confidence, but her hands could not stay still. They introduced themselves with a quiet respect and asked if they could join in. Lorelei considered them for a moment, then gave a short, silent nod. Find a lane. By 800 hours, the atmosphere at the range had completely changed. A group of 5 shooters were now working through drills under Lorelei's guidance. Her soft-spoken words carried absolute authority. It was the kind of presence you cannot learn from a book or a class. It is something you earn by leading others in places where a moment's doubt is fatal. Then, Marcus's rifle suddenly jammed. His hands completely froze. The change was instant. In his mind, he was no longer in Montana. He was trapped in a dark, violent memory from long ago. His breathing became fast and shallow. Sweat appeared on his forehead, despite the morning cool. Lorelei was by his side before anyone else could react. Her voice became low, for his ears alone. Tap, rack, reassess. You know the drill. Run it. Marcus just stared into the distance, his eyes seeing nothing. She put a firm hand on his shoulder, a solid point of contact to bring him back. You are here. You are not there. Run the drill. His hands finally began to move. He tapped the magazine. He racked the charging handle. He reassessed his target. The weapon was clear. His breathing started to even out. The gratitude in his eyes was overwhelming. Lorelei just gave him a small nod. Good. Now, do it again. At about 8:45, a silver sedan arrived, standing out among all the trucks. The driver who emerged was wearing slacks and a collared shirt. It was Garrett Vance. He was carrying a cardboard tray with several coffees and a box of donuts from the town's best bakery. He said, I figured you all could use a little fuel. He set the food and drinks down on a bench near the firing line, but his attention was fixed on Lorelei. He was witnessing a side of her that had been hidden for years. This was the instructor who changed the way Marines approached marksmanship. This was the professional who built training programs that produced the deadliest shooters. He commented, You are still using the old training progression. Lorelei gave him a sharp glance. It still works. It always worked, he replied. The brass just did not like that it was yours. She let the comment pass, turning her focus back to Sarah, who was attempting a difficult 500-yard shot with a rifle not suited for it. It was an ambitious shot. Her form was not ideal, but her sheer will to make it happen was what mattered most. Garrett stayed and watched for another 10 minutes or so. When the group took a brief pause, he approached Lorelei. Can I ask you something? She gave him a nod. Go ahead, he asked. So why now? You have been in Ridgeline for 7 years. You have always kept a low profile and never got involved. What changed? Lorelei looked out beyond the shooting range, her eyes on the distant snow-covered peaks. She glanced back at her students, who were finally experiencing what real training should be. I was tired of carrying it all alone. Garrett nodded slowly, in complete understanding. He did not need any more explanation. He remembered his time at Bragg back in 2001. He understood the cost of that kind of life. He had seen operators come back physically unharmed, but forever altered on the inside. He knew all about the careers that were documented in classified files and the memories that could never be shared. If you need anything, he offered, the range, any equipment, just let me know. I know, she said. He left the coffee and donuts on the bench and drove away in his sedan. Lorelei took a sip of her black coffee. She watched her students improve, one round at a time. By 1000 hours, the temperature had risen by 15 degrees. The group was tired, but their focus was sharp. Tyler's shots were now landing in a tight, consistent group. Brock was finally adjusting for real-world conditions, not just theory. Marcus made it through a whole sequence without hesitating. Using a rifle built for half the range, Sarah hit a target 400 yards away. Lorelei gathered them all. They stood like pupils seeking a master's nod. You are all making the exact same mistake. You are trying to hit the target. That is not your goal, Tyler frowned. Is that not the whole objective? Hitting the target is the result, she explained. Your objective is perfect form. Control your breath, your trigger, and your follow-through. The hit will happen on its own. She took her own rifle and dropped into a shooting stance. She fired 3 rapid shots at a target 600 yards out. Her rhythm was flawless. Breathe in, breathe out, squeeze. Through the scope, 3 holes were grouped in a cluster smaller than a fist. That is not about the target. It is about executing every step correctly. The hit is just the proof. The students looked on in amazement. Sarah broke the silence. How many years did it take to get that good? 30 years of daily practice. The words landed with immense gravity. 30 years, an entire life dedicated to a skill very few could ever hope to achieve. But you were not only practicing on shooting ranges, were you? Sarah said quietly. It was a declaration, not a query. Lorelei looked at her and knew Sarah understood. She had probably served in Air Force intelligence, worked with special teams, and knew of the operators who exist in the shadows. Lorelei remained silent, and her lack of an answer was confirmation enough. At that moment, Tyler's phone buzzed. He glanced down, his expression changing from wonder to alarm. "Chief," he started, "I tried to search for you online. Nearly everything is redacted, but your name is mentioned in some military publications. Your name is found in manuals on long-distance marksmanship. You developed training courses that are still being used. I consulted on several projects. You created the Marine Scout Sniper curriculum in 1997. She coughed slightly. I was a contributor. Brock pulled out his phone, reading aloud. You were an instructor at Spec Ops training centers. You evaluated weapons for SOCOM. You conducted field tests in active war zones. He stopped, his eyes moving from the screen to Lorelei. You were in Beirut when the barracks were attacked. Lorelei's jaw went rigid. A muscle twitched near her temple. Her hand dropped down to her wrist. Her fingers found the paracord bracelet, squeezing it so hard her knuckles turned white. A heavy silence descended on the range. It felt like the wind had stopped. Marcus spoke in a near whisper. 1983. Marine Barracks. 241 killed. You were actually there. Lorelei's breathing changed to a shallow, controlled pattern. It was the same discipline she used when holding the rifle's engraving, a signal that her past was invading her present. I was in Beirut. Tyler's voice was now soft, filled with reverence. Were you at the barracks building? I was running surveillance 1 kilometer away. Her words were empty of all emotion, a skill learned long ago to cage dangerous feelings. We heard the blast and saw the column of smoke. I reported it over the radio before any official alert was issued. Sarah's eyes began to water. You witnessed it all. I witnessed the aftermath. How many people did you save? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Lorelei's hand gripped the bracelet so tightly it dug into her flesh. That information remains classified. But you did pull survivors out. You went into that destruction. Lorelei turned to look at the mountains, her voice barely a sound. Rescue missions in hostile environments are kept secret. The individuals who were there do not speak of it. That has not changed. Brock's voice was tense. You rescued people. I did my duty. Your duty was to observe. My duty was to do what was required. She turned back to look at them. Her face was an emotionless mask, but a shift had taken place. The fortress she had built around herself was showing cracks. The silence she had kept for 7 years was crumbling under their questions and the force of her own history. Marcus stepped a little closer, his nervous fidgeting gone, his gaze firm. "Chief, there is something I must tell you." Lorelei waited. "I came here because I have not had a single good night's sleep in 3 years. I came here because sudden loud noises make me dive to the ground. I cannot hold a job or a relationship, or even act like a normal person. I thought by coming here, maybe the focus of shooting could help me. I was hoping the discipline and the concentration might fix what was broken inside." He paused, finding it hard to swallow. "But I am starting to think that I am not broken. I am just carrying a heavy weight that I do not know how to put down. And watching you, the way you teach, and the way you carry yourself, has helped me see the real truth. The weight never disappears. You just become stronger at bearing it." Lorelei held his gaze. "The weight never disappears. Then, how do you handle it? How do you wake up every morning and continue on? You find something worth protecting, no matter how small. It can be teaching 5 people to become better marksmen." Tyler's voice was filled with emotion. "Is that the reason you began these lessons? To find a new purpose?" Lorelei surveyed her surroundings. She saw the targets, the spent casings on the dirt, and the box of coffee and donuts from Garrett. She saw the small group that was gathering around her solitary skill, a talent she had carried alone for decades. "I grew tired of having nothing to defend." The confession seemed to take a physical toll on her. They watched her shoulders stiffen, her hand go to the bracelet, and a small tremor shake her body before she regained her composure. Sarah moved forward slowly. "Chief, if it is okay, can I ask you about that bracelet?" Lorelei glanced down at her wrist. That faded paracord band, military green, with knots tied by a hand that was now gone. It was from someone who did not make it back. Beirut, Panama. "The topic is not open for discussion. Final." The conversation was at an end. Sarah gave a small nod and retreated, realizing some doors were meant to stay closed. Lorelei checked her watch. 10:47. The available light was starting to fade. "One last round for each of you, and then we are finished." The shooters returned to their spots. As the practice resumed, the feeling had shifted. The group was no longer an instructor with her students. It had become something more. They looked at her with a new kind of respect, knowing the woman teaching them was not just an expert, she was a legend. She was the kind of operator soldiers talk about in hushed voices at base pubs and training facilities. The type of person whose complete history will always be classified, sealed for another 75 years. Tyler fired his last set of shots. All 5 rounds landed in a 6-inch group at 300 yards. It was not flawless, but it was clear improvement. Progress was made in tiny steps. Better. Coming from Lorelei, that one word was worth more than a long speech of praise. Tyler could not stop himself from smiling. By 11:15, the range was deserted. Shells were picked up, targets were taken down, and all the equipment was put away. The shooters lingered near their cars, unwilling to leave, feeling that something significant had happened, but unsure how to express it. Lorelei put her rifle case in her truck. Garrett's empty coffee cup was sitting on the bench. She grabbed it to throw it out and noticed some writing on it. A name had been written on it at the coffee shop. It was not her name. It was a name she had not seen in 23 years. The idea was incredibly disturbing. "Are you all right?" She dropped the cup into the trash can and turned to face him. "I am fine. You do not seem fine." "I said that I am fine." The sharp edge in her voice could have sliced through steel. Tyler took a step backward, raising his hands as if to surrender. Lorelei released a long breath, forcing her shoulders to drop. "Sorry, just old reflexes. It is fine. I understand. You do not, but I appreciate you saying it." She climbed into her truck and started the engine. Tyler tapped on her window. She lowered it. "We will be here next week, same time." Lorelei paused, her eyes moving from the range to the mountains, and then to Tyler's hopeful expression and the others waiting in their cars. Thursday, 0600. Do not be late. She pulled out before he could respond. In her rearview mirror, she saw them all gathered in the lot, talking and making plans, forming a unit. Her self-imposed isolation was cracking. The burden she had carried all by herself for so many years was finally beginning to be shared. The ranch house was in the exact state she had left it. Her bed was made with perfect, tight corners. A kitchen knife was set at a precise 90-degree angle on the cutting board. Her coffee cup was placed exactly 2 inches from the sink. And yet, something was not right. The rifle case was on her table, not locked in the closet. The footlocker in her bedroom seemed to be pulling her toward it with some invisible energy. She stood in front of it for 5 long minutes, her hand on the combination lock, feeling the numbers. She had never bothered to change the code. She could never forget it. 3 numbers that contained decades of memories, of proof, and the only evidence she ever existed in places the world likes to pretend are not real. The lock clicked. She opened the lid with care. The hinges groaned in protest from years of disuse. Inside lay the artifacts of a life she could never speak about, all arranged with military neatness. She saw a Navy SEAL trident pin, its luster gone, corroded by forces it was never designed to meet. Her fingers skimmed over the eagle, anchor, trident, and pistol. It was an emblem of duty people recognized, but few could ever grasp its true meaning. There were also photos of teams in desert camouflage and jungle greens. Others showed them in street clothes before buildings they were never officially near. Every face in every picture was deliberately obscured. All patches and names were gone. These were safety protocols that endured past service, beyond retirement, and even after death. She found a letter, penned by hand on official Navy stationery. Though the ink had faded, the message was still legible. It said, "You were the absolute best we had." The signature was a meaningless scrawl by design. Acknowledging praise was as dangerous as acknowledging failure. Beside it lay another paracord bracelet, identical to the one she wore. This one appeared newer, hardly worn at all. It belonged to someone who ran out of time to give it character. A fabric name tag was attached, with black letters on white showing a name she had not spoken aloud in 23 years. She lifted the bracelet, holding it beside her own. They were finally a pair. It was the first time they had been together since Panama, since an operation that succeeded on paper but failed in heart. The mission that saved 12 people but sacrificed one. A tremor began in her hand. The tremor climbed her arm, reached her shoulder, and then her entire frame shuddered. Her steel-like composure, maintained for 7 years, finally started to crack. A sound tore from her throat, not quite a cry or a gasp. It was the sound of sorrow, rage, and utter weariness combined. She sank onto the bed, gripping the bracelets, her gaze locked on the name tag. Tears began to stream down her face, one after another. She made no effort to stop them. She just sat there in the sunlight, weeping for the first time since the funeral she was forbidden to attend. Because according to the official record, there was no loss, no mission, and no one to mourn. Beyond the window, the wind picked up. Dark clouds gathered, promising rain by evening. She knew how to interpret the sky from her time and places without weather reports, where a shift in the air could decide between mission success and catastrophe. That skill never left her. Most parts of that old life had not. She placed the 2 bracelets side by side on the nightstand. The set was not whole, but it was finally together. She rose and moved to the kitchen to make coffee she did not plan to drink. The simple task was soothing. Familiar motions calmed her inner chaos. Her phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. It was brief. It said, "Thank you for this morning. My name is Marcus. Tyler shared your number. I hope that is all right. I wanted to let you know I got 4 hours of uninterrupted sleep after we met. That had not happened in months. Whatever you are doing is helping." She reviewed his words 3 times, but did not answer. She was not sure how to respond. A new feeling was building in her, something she could not name. It might have been purpose, or perhaps it was connection. A sense that her own heavy past could now help others do more than just endure. Then a message from Sarah arrived. "Chief, thanks for the range time. I needed that. See you Thursday." Next was Brock. "I bought new scope rings. I will get it sighted in for next time. Appreciate the direct feedback." Finally, a text from Tyler came through. "You are making a difference, Chief. I hope you realize that." She set her phone down, looking at it like a strange object from another world. People were reaching out. A community was forming around her. Her self-imposed exile was dissolving with each message. Back in the bedroom, the foot locker remained open, its secrets exposed to daylight for the first time in 7 years. The trident pin caught the sun, sending a shimmer across the ceiling. The stack of photos held vivid memories behind their blurred faces. The letter was still there, offering praise from an anonymous source for a service that officially never happened. And on the nightstand, 2 bracelets sat side by side. One was frayed from years of wear, the other was pristine because of loss. They were reunited, but incomplete. They could not be made whole, but at least they were together. Lorelei returned to her room. She glanced at the bracelets, the open locker, the secret past she had guarded, and the new beginning she was building. She gathered both bracelets in one hand. With the other, she began to weave them into a single piece. She used complex military knots, designed to hold firm under incredible strain and in environments that would destroy lesser rope. Her fingers worked automatically. The skill was pure muscle memory, learned 30 years prior and perfected through endless repetition. When she finished, the 2 bracelets were one unified band. It was thicker and more durable, a fusion of her history and her future. She slid it onto her wrist. It felt heavier, but also perfectly balanced. She shut the lid of the footlocker, but left it unlocked. The heavy combination lock sat on the floor beside the case, ready but no longer necessary. In her kitchen, she finished the cold coffee while observing the storm clouds. Rain was coming. The range would turn to mud tomorrow. However, Thursday was still 3 days away. That gave the ground enough time to dry out. It gave the students time to practice their new skills. It gave her time to design the next stage of their instruction, the kind that shapes professionals, not amateurs. Her phone vibrated again. It was Garrett. He wrote, "I watched you at the range this morning. It made me remember why I opened this place. Thank you for being here." She read the message, set the phone aside, and took her empty mug. She cleaned it, dried it, and placed it precisely 2 inches from the sink's edge. Outside, the first raindrops began to hit the roof. The tapping sounded like distant shots. Her training took over instantly. Her body tensed, her awareness peaked. Her hand instinctively reached for a sidearm that was not there. Then she pulled herself back. She was not in Beirut or Panama. She was not in any of the dozen other locations where rain meant danger and last-second changes. She was in Montana, building a new life from the fragments of a past that officially did not exist. Thunder rumbles as the storm builds. She watches it from her window, a hand resting on the woven bracelet at her wrist. She can feel her past and present joined together in the knots, in her memories, and in a grief that will always remain. But for the first time, that grief feels like it has a purpose. We all know quiet heroes like her, people who carry unimaginable weight without a word of complaint. They are the silent foundation for so many others, yet their own stories are never told. If this reminds you of someone, please share it. And if you believe these forgotten legacies need a voice, subscribe to our channel. We are dedicated to telling the stories of people like Lorelei Byrne, who quietly shaped our world from the shadows. Her Thursday classes continued through summer and into the fall. In just 6 weeks, beginners were transformed into capable shooters. Her group expanded from 5 students to 8, and soon to 12. Veterans from 3 different states made the journey, drawn by rumors on forums and at gatherings. The word was out. Chief Byrne was back. The legendary instructor, once considered a ghost story, was real. By mid-October, the air at 0600 was so cold you could see your breath, and a layer of frost coated the target holders. Lorelei arrived every morning at 0545. Her motions were fluid as she prepared the targets, a lifetime of practice made visible. She used a Remington 700, a present from Garrett for a rifle she helped design. Her initials were engraved in spots no one else would look. Tyler arrived at 0557 with Marcus, Sarah, and 10 others close behind, their pickups lined up with precision. The veterans emerged with their gear and coffee, united by an unspoken understanding of burdens carried for a lifetime. Lorelei led them through the fundamentals they had honed for 6 weeks: breath control, trigger discipline, and range estimation without gadgets. She focused on the fundamental skills that separate a true marksman from a casual gun owner. Her calm, steady voice carried easily across the range, demanding focus. When she spoke, they hung on every word. When she showed them a technique, they watched with an intensity born from real-world stakes. At about 7:37, an unfamiliar vehicle pulled up. It was a black sport utility vehicle, not a pickup, and it had government plates. The engine ran for 2 minutes before cutting out. 2 men stepped out. They had on suits beneath tactical vests, sharp haircuts, and the unmistakable posture of government operatives. Tyler was the first to notice them. He spoke softly, "Chief, someone is here." Lorelei saw the vehicle but did not turn around. She stayed focused, guiding Sarah on a 600-yard shot. The men approached carefully, hands visible, their stance relaxed but ready. One was older, maybe late 50s, with graying temples. The other was younger, around 35, and looked sharp. The older man paused about 15 feet away. He waited for Lorelei to acknowledge him, which she did right away. "Is there something I can do for you?" she asked. "I am retired Chief Petty Officer Byrne," the man stated, nodding. "I know. My name is Coleman." "This here is Agent Harris," Coleman went on. "We represent the Naval Special Warfare Command. We are creating a history of the early integration programs." Lorelei's jaw tightened instantly. A small muscle jumped by her ear. "That information is classified," she said, her voice hard. "The records are being reviewed for declassification. We are talking to people who served between 1979 and 2001. "I have no comment," she answered. "We are not after mission details," he clarified, "only to confirm your service dates and assignments." "It is still classified," she insisted. Coleman stepped closer as Harris stayed back, observing. The shooters had all lowered their weapons. The entire range was now listening. "Chief Byrne, you have been here for 6 weeks," Coleman stated. "Word gets around. A female SEAL instructor in Montana is a big story. In our world, news travels fast. Then our world needs to keep its mouth shut," she shot back. Tyler moved closer to her. "Chief, what is going on?" Lorelei's gaze remained fixed on Coleman. "This does not concern you. Get back to the line." "With all due respect, ma'am," Tyler replied. "They are asking about your service. That concerns every one of us." "Stand down, Tyler," she commanded. Her voice was ice. Tyler moved back but stayed put. The others gathered behind him, forming a silent wall of support. Coleman's expression softened. "Chief, we are not here to cause problems. The Navy wants to officially recognize your service. There will be a ceremony at Dam Neck. A few of the first female operators will be commended for their work." Lorelei's hand automatically found her wrist. Her fingers wrapped around the 2 paracord bracelets, feeling their comforting presence. Her past and present were woven together there. "No, sir," she said without hesitation. "I did not do it for a medal. I did it because it was necessary. Recognition was never part of the deal, and it is not now." "Times have changed," Coleman urged. "The Navy wants to honor your achievements." "The Navy can honor me by leaving me alone," she stated. Marcus spoke then, his voice steady. "Chief, perhaps you should listen to them." Lorelei turned to face her students for the first time. All 12 stood as one, a team in a way she was only now understanding. "You have no idea what you are asking," she said to them. "We know you did something vital," Marcus answered. "We know you gave up things we cannot fathom. That kind of service deserves to be honored, whether you want it or not." Sarah stepped up. "Chief, for 6 weeks you said the mission is more important than our feelings. You said doing what is right matters more than doing what is easy. Maybe this is the mission now." Lorelei was silent. The logic was perfect. But perfect logic could not remove the danger of leaving the shadows after decades. It ignored the promises made in secret and the peace she had found in being invisible. Coleman pulled a folder from his jacket. Inside were photographs. He showed them to Lorelei. They were black and white images from the 1980s and 90s, capturing training and mission plans. A much younger Lorelei was unmistakable in 3 of the pictures. It was definitely her. "These are going into the official archives," Coleman said. "Your history is about to become public knowledge. So it is not a question of if this comes out," he told her. "The question is, do you tell your story, or does someone else tell it?" Lorelei's breathing grew shallow, a telltale sign she was controlling her emotions. "Who else is in those photos?" she demanded. "People whose families gave permission, and those who are gone and have no family to ask." The second bracelet on her wrist. The name inside her old trunk. The man who did not make it home from Panama. His name would finally be heard. His sacrifice would be seen. Lorelei had to choose if that public honor was worth her private pain. Tyler moved to stand right next to her. "Chief," he began, "whatever you decide, we have your back." Marcus stepped to her other side. "You showed us how to handle the hard stuff. We will handle this with you." Slowly, the other shooters created a loose circle around Lorelei. It was not a trap, it was a wall of support. It was proof that she was no longer on her own. The family she had forged was genuine. Lorelei's gaze shifted from Coleman to the pictures and to the students whose loyalty encircled her. When her words finally came, they were quiet but solid. "If I go through with this ceremony, I have terms." "Tell me," Coleman replied. "The fallen will be honored with the highest respect. They will receive full military honors, and their families will be told with care. Nothing political." "Done," Coleman agreed. "And my people are coming too." She nodded toward the 12 shooters. Coleman observed the veterans who had closed ranks around a woman they hardly knew yet trusted completely. "We can make that happen," he said. Lorelei nodded once, curtly. "Then I will consider it." "I need to know by Friday," Coleman informed her. "You will have your answer." He handed her a card. "This is how you can reach me. And Chief, I really mean this, thank you. For what you did then, and for what you are doing now, it all counts." He and Harris returned to their vehicle and left. A deep silence fell over the range. Tyler was the first to speak. "Chief, are you really thinking about doing this?" "I am not sure," she said. She went to her position, raised her rifle, and placed 3 perfect shots on a 700-yard target. Her actions were exact, honed over 30 years. Breathe in, breathe out, press the trigger. It was how she made sense of the world. Her students returned to their places. The training started again, but the world was different now. The private woman they knew was on the verge of becoming known, facing a danger she had always avoided. That evening, Lorelei sat in her kitchen, looking at Coleman's card. Laid out on the table were the relics of a secret life. Her trident pin, old photos of blurred faces, and a commendation for service that officially never happened. And on a small fabric tag was a name she had not spoken in 23 years. She took her phone and called the number Tyler had given her. He answered immediately. Tyler speaking. "Tyler, it is Lorelei. Chief, is something wrong? I need your opinion. Of course, anything. If you could honor a fallen hero, someone whose sacrifice was a secret, would you do it? Even if it meant losing everything?" A long silence hung in the air. Tyler's voice returned, heavy with feeling. Yes, absolutely. Without any hesitation. Even if it means uncovering things you kept hidden? Especially then, he said, because that story must be told. If you are the person who can tell it, it is not a weight to carry. It is a privilege. Lorelei closed her eyes. Thank you, Tyler. Who is it for? He asked gently. Someone, she answered, who deserved better than a secret file and a faded memory. She ended the call, took the name tag, and ran her finger over the letters. She had made a decision. On Friday morning, she called Coleman and said she would attend. She provided the name from the tag and asked for full honors for a soldier killed in Panama on a mission that did not exist. Coleman confirmed it would happen. The process would be difficult, he said, but the recognition would be real and correct. 2 months after that, Lorelei stood in dress blues she had not worn for 23 years. The uniform still fit her perfectly. Her trident pin was shined and pinned in its proper place. Beneath her cuff, on her right wrist, the paracord bracelets felt new. Their weight seemed right, finally whole. The event took place at Joint Expeditionary Base Little Creek in Virginia. It was a small, respectful ceremony. 20 of the earliest female operators were honored for 40 years of quiet service. Their families attended, alongside the current SEAL leadership. Only official Navy photographers were permitted inside. Lorai's entire team had made the trip. All 12 of them were present in the audience, wearing their best attempts at formal attire. Tyler's suit was a bit too snug. Marcus sported a fresh haircut, a clear sign of his effort. Sarah wore a dress that was pretty but visibly restrictive. They came because she asked them to. Those 6 months of Thursday mornings had built a connection that went far beyond a normal classroom. The commander of Naval Special Warfare Command delivered a speech. He acknowledged that history had gaps, that great deeds were done by people whose names went unrecorded. He declared it was time to correct that, in a small but meaningful way. One by one, the women were summoned to the stage. Each received a formal citation. Each was granted 30 seconds of public praise for careers lived entirely in the shadows. When Lorai's name was announced, she moved to the podium as if she had rehearsed it mentally 1,000 times, but never out loud. Chief Petty Officer Lorai Byrne. She served on active duty from 1979 to 2001. Her record included many classified operations in places like Beirut, Panama, and across 3 separate continents. She was the lead instructor for advanced marksmanship. She served as an evaluator for new weapons systems. She was a consultant for training doctrines that are still in practice today. The citation continued. Every single word was crafted to honor her service without revealing state secrets, to give her credit without compromising operations. After he finished reading, the commanding officer pinned a medal to her uniform. It was not one of the awards she had earned on clandestine missions. Those would stay sealed away for another 50 years. This medal, however, was an acknowledgement that she had served, that her contributions mattered, and that her work had shaped the force into what it is today. She rendered a crisp salute. He returned it. She stepped away. But then an unexpected thing happened. Tyler rose to his feet and began to clap. Marcus joined him, then Sarah, and then her entire team. Soon, others in the room who had never met her started to applaud, sensing the true significance of the moment. The applause intensified, shifting from polite to a powerful wave of genuine respect. Lorai's jaw tightened. A flicker of moisture appeared in her eyes. She did not weep or falter, but a small piece of the iron control she always maintained seemed to dissolve. Later, at the reception, Lorai was surrounded by her team. She was never comfortable with being the center of attention, but she managed it. Garrett appeared, having driven the whole way from Montana. He offered her a coffee in a paper cup, just as he had at the shooting range months before. "This suits you, Chief." The uniform, the credit. She took a sip of the coffee. It was terrible, like all coffee on a military base. She had missed it. An older woman then approached her. She was in her late 70s and moved with caution, but her spirit was clearly determined. She stopped directly in front of Lorai and examined her face. "You were in Beirut." The words were a statement, not a question. Lorai offered a slow, deliberate nod. "My name is Margaret Chen. My son was stationed at the barracks. He was a Marine. He was pulled from the rubble by someone his buddies described as a female operator. They said she appeared from nowhere, took charge of the medical efforts, and then disappeared before anyone could get her name." Lorai felt the breath catch in her throat. The barracks bombing had been absolute chaos. There were hundreds of casualties and rescue teams everywhere. She could recall pulling men from twisted metal and concrete. She could recall the blood, the thick smoke, and the desperate calls for help. She remembered working until her hands were raw, and her uniform was destroyed. "I cannot be certain if that was me." Margaret's eyes were moist, but her voice remained firm. "My son is alive, because somebody knew exactly what to do, because someone kept a clear head when the world was coming apart. He is alive right now. He has 3 children, and he works as a paramedic. And for 40 years, he has wondered who saved his life so that he could finally say thank you." She presented a photograph of a young Marine in his dress blue uniform. Then she offered another picture of the same man, now older, standing with his family, his face full of life and happiness. Lorai accepted the photo. She looked at the man's face, but could not place him. It was impossible to remember a single face from that terrible day. But she did remember the work. She remembered her duty. She remembered doing everything in her power to pull people from what should have been their final resting place. "I am just glad he made it home." Margaret softly took Lorai's hand in her own. "Thank you. For my son. For all of them. For doing what you did when nobody was watching, and nobody would ever find out." Those words broke something deep inside her. The last defense she had built around her heart finally gave way. Lorai's eyes filled with tears. A single tear made its way down her cheek. She did not bother to wipe it away. Tyler materialized at her side. "Chief, there is someone else who wants to meet you." He gestured toward a man in his 60s, wearing a naval officer's uniform. His face was familiar, but aged. It took Lorai 3 seconds. Then the recognition struck her like a physical force. The man stepped closer and extended his hand. "Chief Byrne. It has been a very long time. Commander Parsons." He was a retired captain now. He gave a warm smile. "I was at Bragg back in 2001. You taught the advanced shooting course. You completely changed my perspective on marksmanship." "I remember you," she said. He continued. "I went on to manage training for 3 different SEAL teams. I implemented your methods and prepared hundreds of operators. Every last one of them was a better shooter because of what you showed me." He paused, making direct eye contact with her. "You saved lives, Chief. Not only in Beirut or Panama, but with every operator who returned home because you made them better, faster, and calmer under pressure. That is your real legacy, whether you see it that way or not." Lorai was unable to speak. All of her emotions were right there on the surface. She could only manage a nod. Parsons gave her a sharp salute. She returned it just as crisply. He then walked off, leaving her standing there with her team, encircled by people whose lives she had impacted in ways she was just starting to understand. The reception went on for another hour. Lorai spoke with the other honored women and met their families. She accepted gratitude from strangers whose loved ones were still alive because of her. The immense pressure she had carried on her shoulders for decades at last began to ease. It was not gone completely, but it was now being shared. On the plane ride back to Montana, Tyler was in the seat next to her. She was silent, simply observing the clouds passing below. "Are you doing okay, Chief?" he asked her. "I am not sure yet. That was a lot to process." She nodded. "Do you regret going?" he asked. "No. I thought I might, but I do not." "Good," he said, and then he hesitated. "So, what comes next?" "The usual. Thursday mornings, 6 o'clock training. So, nothing is different? He asked. Everything is different, she answered, but the work continues. The aircraft landed in Montana near midnight. Lorray drove toward home in the darkness, her headlights cutting a path along the mountain roads. The ranch house appeared exactly as she had left it, but when she stepped inside, the atmosphere had changed. The old footlocker in her bedroom was now open. Its contents were no longer concealed. The trident pin was now displayed on the fireplace mantel, sitting next to old team pictures and recent photos of her students at the range. Her past was finally coexisting with her present. She changed out of her dress blues. For so long, her service was a secret, her sacrifices hidden away in classified documents. This is the story of a hero who was invisible for years, and how sharing the burden she carried alone gave her a renewed sense of purpose. If you think that good people deserve to be seen, please pass this story on. She hung her formal uniform in the closet, not to be put away, but to be kept ready. The woven paracord bracelets were taken off her wrist and placed beside the name tag. Tonight, they would have a rest. She brewed some coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watching the stars shine above the dark mountains. Her phone screen lit up. A message from Marcus said being there meant the world to him. Sarah had called her a true hero. Tyler wrote that he was honored to be her student. She looked at their messages, unable to form a reply, feeling a profound sense of gratitude and relief. It was the realization that a weight shared in the open is much lighter than one carried in secret. Thursday came, the air cold and clear. Lorelei was on the range by 5:45 in the morning, setting up targets with an expert's efficiency. The work was a familiar, comforting routine. She ran the same drills she had for months, yet something had changed. The burden on her spirit felt lighter, as it was now distributed among many instead of being held by her alone. Trucks began arriving at 5:57. It was Tyler, Marcus, Sarah, and 10 other regular shooters. But this morning was not the same. 4 new vehicles pulled up, carrying 8 new faces. They were veterans who had learned of the ceremony and had driven all the way to Montana to meet her. They came toward her with a quiet reverence. One of them, a woman in her 40s who carried herself like an Air Force officer, was the first to speak. "Chief Byrne, my name is retired Captain Rodriguez. I flew missions that used targeting protocols you helped create. It would be my honor to learn from you." Lorelei surveyed the larger group. There were now 20 shooters, more than she had anticipated. But it was exactly what these Thursday mornings had grown into. A community of people with a common mission. "Get your rifles ready on the line," she instructed. "We will begin in 5 minutes." The training session continued until noon, running longer than usual to include the new arrivals. Lorelei moved among them with patient expertise, correcting a stance here or adjusting breathing there with the same dedication for everyone. A fresh face got the same focus as a seasoned regular. During a break, Garrett showed up with more coffee and sandwiches for everyone. He laid out the food and stood next to Lorelei while the shooters relaxed. "What you have here is special, Chief," he said quietly. "It is about more than just hitting targets. You are building a family, sharing your knowledge, and giving them a purpose." He nodded at the others. "Just watch them. They are not simply practicing their aim. They are learning from a person they deeply admire. Someone skilled, focused, and rock solid." "That means a great deal," Garrett finished. Lorelei observed her students. Tyler helped a newcomer with their scope settings. Marcus demonstrated the proper way to lie flat. Sarah taught a young man how to interpret the wind. The wisdom was flowing from one to the next. The group was becoming more tight-knit. The duty carried on. Later that day, Lorelei sat at her table, photographs laid out in front of her. Old images from a sealed trunk rested beside new ones from that morning. She arranged them chronologically, seeing her life unfold from a shadow operative to a solitary vet, and now to this new role she could not yet define. She selected 2 particular photos, placing them side by side. On the left was her unit from 1997, faces indistinct in desert gear, full of the easy courage of youth on operations that quietly changed the world. The picture on the right was her new group. 20 shooters, faces clear and smiling in the Montana sun, creating a new family. The two parts of her life were no longer walled off. Her decision to mentor and be known had finally bridged the gap. She set both pictures on her mantelpiece, giving them the same prominence. Then she placed her trident pin in the middle. It represented the duty that had shaped her and the costs that had forged her. She slipped the connected paracord bracelets onto her wrist. The combined weight felt correct. Her fingers brushed them without thinking, as she prepared a meal and maintained a weapon. As dusk fell on Montana, she sipped her coffee and stared at the mantle. It was evidence of an existence that was finally out in the open. Her phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number appeared. Chief Byrne, Commander Walsh here, Naval Special Warfare. We wish to speak about you advising on new training standards. The message ended with one word. Interested? She reread the text, considering the implications. This would put her back on the grid. It meant returning to a life she abandoned 23 years prior. It was a complete step out of the darkness. She typed her reply. Provide the details. I will look them over. The job is never over. The task evolves, but the principles do not. Skill, focus, and duty. She went to the mantel and ran her fingers over the pictures, outlining the faces both old and new. Her two worlds were now linked because she chose to embrace her past, not conceal it. She now realized that certain sacrifices must be recognized, even if those who made them sought no credit. Outside, the first stars emerged. They were the same stars she had used for guidance on missions across 3 continents, the very constellations she followed when the gear failed. They remained, unwavering and faithful. She went back to her chair and took the bracelets, cradling them. One was her own. The second had belonged to a teammate who did not make it back. They represented a bond, a loss, and the painful reality that some operations demand a heavier price. But they also symbolized resilience and the will to push on. They were a pledge to share her expertise, so others might bear the load more easily. Thursday would arrive as always, 6 a.m. at the Ridgeline Range. 20 shooters would attend, perhaps more. The team was constantly expanding, and Lorelei Byrne, a person who lived in the shadows for years, was at last visible in a meaningful way. Not for awards or recognition, but because the duty demanded it. Because wisdom is worthless if it stays hidden. And because her students had earned the right to learn from someone who had seen it all and lived to share the truth. She put the bracelets down, her eyes on the photos one last time. A slight, authentic smile formed on her face. The feeling was unfamiliar, but true. The burden was still there, but it was carried by many now. That changed everything. A deep silence fell over the house. At 5:30 tomorrow, she would rise, make her bed with sharp corners, and do 100 push-ups. She would have her coffee while studying the images that were no longer hidden. Her schedule had not changed, but the loneliness was gone for good. In 3 days, on a Montana range, 20 veterans will assemble to learn from someone they look up to, skilled, tough, and impossible to break. Chief Petty Officer Lorelei Byrne, retired and finally seen. She is out of the shadows at last, still instructing, still on duty, and still bearing a burden made lighter because it is shared. If this story resonated with you, and if you know a veteran who served in silence, pass this along to them. Remind them that their commitment was seen, and their duty counted for more than any file could ever state. And if you agree that such tales of quiet courage deserve a spotlight, we invite you to subscribe. More stories like this are out there, waiting to be told. More legacies are waiting to be celebrated. And more truth is ready to come out of the darkness.